Uh, Welcome, everyone. Uh, Thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited to share with you some of the strategies that I've used over the years to raise the visibility of collections that center the voices and lived experiences of historically marginalized folks. Um, I'm also super excited to be here today to discover through conversation new ideas and tools for doing that kind of work. So I have a lot of links to share with you, and so my thinking was the easiest way to do that was just to share a Google version of my slides, and all of the hyperlinks are contained within the presentation. So you can click on them and access them either during the presentation or at your leisure. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. But before I do that, I kind of just want to provide a little background about myself. I think it's important to take a moment and acknowledge my positionality. So I would say that I approach librarianship from the standpoint of a queer Black woman in America. So I know on a very personal level what it's like to have your voice silenced, um, your lived experiences, your history, your identity systematically erased or distorted. What it's like, to borrow the words of Toni Morrison, what to be disremembered or unaccounted for. And so I use my position as a librarian to be a kind of disruptor. And what that means to me is resisting erasure. It means decentering the center. And it means working every day to kind of amplify the voices of folks who are similarly positioned, folks who also live at the margins, folks who are also disremembered and unaccounted for because of where they stand at the intersections of gender, sexuality, race, ethnicity, nationality, religion, age, ability, or those other kinds of major axes of power. Um, and this is a standpoint that I believe is consistent with the core values of librarianship as outlined by the American Library Association. So that being access, democracy, education and lifelong learning, intellectual freedom, the public good, social responsibility. So I just wanted to begin by kind of acknowledging that this is the lens through which I view and practice librarianship. It's basically the lens that by which I show up. So with that said, I'd like to preview what I have prepared for you today. So the goals of today's session are kind of twofold. One is to share strategies that I've used over the years to increase awareness of and engagement with EDI-centered collections, and that's the main focus of today's presentation. But then to also work together toward building a shared set of best practices that can be adapted to our different institutional contexts. So to that end, I'm going to start by just kind of providing some context for the DEI audit I did when I was a research librarian at Trinity College, and an unexpected problem that surfaced. And then I'll share, by way of lots of examples, strategies that I've used over the years, both at Trinity and now here at CT State Manchester campus, to make EDI-centered collections discoverable and used. And then I'll end by discussing some of the challenges that I've encountered in doing this work and also some possible solutions or workarounds to those challenges. And then I'll open up the session to questions and discussion, at which point I'll share with you a Google Doc that allows us to kind of work probably mainly asynchronously. I think it's what makes most sense to generate a working set of best practices. I'm thinking of the document that I'm going to share later as kind of intended to function like a repository for folks to contribute to, consult, draw from, adapt. So starting with some context. So I'm originally a sociologist by training, and I've taught lots and lots of classes centered around different forms of inequality. Um, but I would say that my EDI and social justice work in libraries really took off in the summer of 2020, following the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, countless others, along with the growing movement for Black Lives, and the nationwide racial reckoning that was happening and kind of permeating higher education. And I was at a librarian at Trinity at the time, and the president of the college, Joanne Berger Sweeney, along with a collective of student groups that called themselves the Emoja Coalition, uh, put out a call to action to the campus community. I would say it was clear in that moment that we were in a kind of inflection point. And at the same time, I was trying to figure out what to do with everything that I was feeling and experiencing personally. So I started by creating, and this is hyperlinked, so you can take a look at it if you'd like. I started by creating an anti-racism reading list for the campus community as kind of a way of providing resources that would aid in the development of the kind of critical consciousness, I think we call it woke now, that is needed to effect social change. And at the same time, I also reached out to my really awesome library colleagues to ask if we could write a statement supporting anti-racism, and then to have that statement permanently housed on our under our library's mission and vision page, along with a link to the anti-racism reading list. And as you can see here, we ended up doing that. But I have to say, on a very personal level, I still felt like it wasn't enough. Um, I think that while statements are well intentioned, and I felt proud that we had put out a statement, and from my perspective, a statement that isn't followed by action, continuous action, has the potential to feel performative, and that's not what we were aiming for. Um, and while I was thinking all of these things, it was around that time that I also just kind of happened to come across the University of North Carolina's Reckoning Initiative, which is really amazing. There's a link here to learn more about it. We're doing all of this great work to integrate EDI and social justice into all aspects of library work, including collections. So in fall 2020, taking inspiration from UNC's Reckoning Initiative, I reached out again to colleagues as well as some students on our library student advisory board, and we started conducting diversity audits of our collections. And to keep it manageable, we started with our very, very popular but not too big leisure reading collection, to identify like what are the existing gaps in this collection, and then doing collection development to fill those gaps. So based on our findings from the audit, we ended up selecting titles that centered the voices, the stories, and really the lived experiences of Asian and Pacific Islanders, Indigenous peoples, LGBTQ plus communities, and Black and Latinx communities. And bear with me, I'll explain this in a moment. So in terms of building diversity into the stacks, we were quite successful. We added hundreds of new titles to the leisure collection. I had founded by this point our Ideas Action Group, where we codified this work into the Racial Justice Action Plan we ended up putting out. So we started doing the same kind of work for some of our other collections. And I felt very proud of this work. But every day I would walk by the library and I would look at the books, and there they were, all of these wonderful, diverse books sitting on our shelves. And I kept feeling like something else was supposed to happen. So humor me for a moment. My kids, when they were little, they're now 14 and 12. But when they were little, they were absolutely obsessed with the movie Finding Nemo. I've seen this movie more times than I can count. But there's a super cute subplot where you have these fish that live in a tank in a dentist's office. And they spend the entirety of the movie devising strategies to escape this tank and live a free life in the ocean. And they try lots of different things, but by the end of the movie, they are successful. They figure out a way to make the tank super dirty so that the dentist has to take each of them out of the tank and put them in individual bags. And then when he isn't looking, they roll off the counter, roll out the window, roll across a busy highway, and drop into the ocean. And after all that work, they feel incredibly proud of what they have accomplished until the puffer fish says, now what? And I think this moment kind of captures how I felt about doing a diversity audit and the collection development that followed. It's a tremendous amount of work. We put all of these books in our collections, and then I stared at them and thought, now what? We've built it. How do we make them come? How do we make sure that folks know that these collections exist? How do we create engagement? Because after all, that is the point. We want people to read and engage with these works, with these voices. And clearly something needed to happen beyond the diversity audit. Otherwise, collections with diverse materials are not inclusive if the diverse materials are invisible or inaccessible. So I think I came to realize that the diversity audit and the collection development that followed was really phase one, and that there needed to be a phase two where we devise strategies for engagement so that we can arrive at the inclusion end of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So I went back to my office and wrote a strategic plan for marketing what we were at that point calling the BIPOC and LGBTQ plus collections. And the plan that I ended up writing identified target audiences, the goals for the marketing plan, the strategies and tools for promoting the collection, a timeline for doing that, and the metrics for determining success. And our primary goals, which were informed by the overall mission of our organization, were as follows. So generate awareness and promote use of and engagement with collections among the campus community, encourage and respond to community feedback to continue to build responsive EDI-centered collections, build and leverage partnerships with faculty to integrate collections into the curriculum, and build and leverage partnerships with student groups to integrate collections into relevant programming and events. And if you'd like to see the full marketing plan, I linked it there. Hopefully it's accessible. So the tools for outreach and engagement that we ended up using is what I'd like to share now. So just to back up a little, when I shared the anti-racism reading list with the campus community, the response was overwhelming. At the time, I was in charge of our social media, and the Instagram post received 60 likes. And that may not sound like a lot, but we were used to getting like 5 likes, 3 of which were us. So that was a big deal. And it was also our most viewed Instagram story. And people actually left comments, which never ever happened. I also received a lot of emails from different members of the campus community expressing excitement and pride that the reading list existed, but also asking where to start if you're new to this kind of work, which prompted me to go back into the collection and add a start here gallery box at the very top. And then a colleague shared the reading list with the college president, who then shared it out in an all points email to the entire campus community, encouraging folks to use it, especially because it included action steps that people could take. Once you gain this new knowledge, here's what you can do with it. And then the Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion ended up putting it permanently on their homepage under key DEI campus resources. So I'm told as of today, the guide has 2,715 hits, and that's without continuous promotion, and that people are still stopping by the library to borrow materials from the collection. So going back to when I created this collection and seeing the response, I kind of had an epiphany. The response to the anti-racism reading list led me to realize that we already had a great tool in our toolkit for increasing awareness and engagement with EDI and social justice centered collections. And it was a tool that was already familiar to the campus community, LibGuides. And then I also realized, based on that response, that LibGuides work not only as a tool for building awareness and engagement, but also as a tool for outreach, for social justice, if used in a certain way. And as you will see later, even as a tool for reverse diversity audits. So the anti-racism reading list, because of all of this, basically became my blueprint for how to use LibGuides to increase awareness of and engagement with DEI-centered collections. And I picked up some additional good practices or best practices on the way. And those practices are as follows. So when building these kinds of collections using the LibGuides platform, you want to build collections around a point of need. You want to design for a wide audience, make them collaborative projects, integrate them into the curriculum, integrate them into campus events, make them discoverable in the catalog, and then finally use additional evidence-based best practices for just marketing and promoting collections in general. But what I'd like to do for the most of the time that I have left is to go through these 7 best practices and elaborating on these and providing some examples. Starting with build collections around a point of need to increase discoverability, relevance, and engagement. So I think we all know, and this is from research and from experience, that course and assignment guides receive higher levels of interaction than subject guides. Why is that? I think it's because students and faculty and staff, for that matter, interact with resources that they perceive to be current and relevant. So creating a resource that is at the point of need is the key for it to be visible and for people to engage with it. So I'm convinced that the anti-racism reading list, for example, was so well used because it filled a particular need. It was created and shared out at the height of a racial reckoning that was happening in this country, and folks were eagerly looking for precisely these kinds of resources. So I very consciously, when I was at Trinity, surfaced existing materials in our collections and new ones that we added from auditing our collections and doing collection development to start building a series of Heritage Month focus collections that I shared out to the campus community during the start, middle, and end of each celebration, taking advantage of existing levels of interest and engagement already happening on campus. At the same time, I also think we should aim for diverse representation in everything at every time. So this also meant that when I created a collection for Banned Books Week, I centered historically marginalized voices, which makes sense because those were precisely the voices being banned and challenged. When we students asked to have a Valentine's Day event where we did blind date with a book, and then a student group wanted to do an event around self-love and asked for a collection for that, again, centered the voices of historically marginalized groups in those collections. Same when we did stuff for around wellness, same when we did stuff for national poetry events, diverse representation in everything at every time. And I found that building collections around a particular point of need in this way often meant that, and you'll see later, that there were lots of events happening on campus that I could then integrate the collections into. So two, design for a wide audience. So the thing to keep in mind is you are not building a guide for a particular set of students in a specific class or discipline. You are building something for the entire campus community and potentially beyond. So you want to avoid the typical LibGuide structure, design, and content choices. So I always aimed for a bookstore website kind of feel that relies very, very heavily on simple and clean visual design. So I always use the display as a single page option, and I keep the design of each of the mini collections consistent across them. And I've also branded them as mini collections to kind of set them apart from our typical subject, course, and assignment guides. I also, whenever I'm making these, try to avoid too much text and to really make use of white space to give the eyes a rest. I use the gallery boxes for basically everything, but especially the books, taking care to move books that have particularly compelling titles or covers to the front, because we do judge a book by its cover, and that is precisely the point of a cover. And then I've organized the books by categories or genres as kind of a way of providing direction for folks using the collection. But I think perhaps most importantly, I include both library and non-library content. So what you're seeing right now is screenshots of an Afrofuturism collection that I created with two colleagues for Black History Month. And the collection included books from our campus library, as well as books from the consortium. But then it also included things like online stories that don't live behind a paywall that anyone can access. It included curated playlists that I made in Spotify and then added to the collection, and along with YouTube playlist of videos that corresponded to the Spotify playlist. It included a gallery of Afrofuturist open access art, as well as digital exhibits that people could explore. And then films. There was a student group on campus that would have film festivals and wanted to use the films here for an Afrofuturist film festival as a result. I included podcasts, games, conferences, etc. Including resources beyond the library does a couple of things. It creates a richer experience for folks using the collections. I also think it situates the library collections in a broader context, which increases their relevance and then therefore engagement. And most importantly, it fits with the overall goal of amplifying historically marginalized voices by sharing out all of the different spaces and mediums that these voices can be heard and engaged with. The next best practice, I would say, is make them collaborative projects. The way I see it, EDI and social justice work isn't an individual activity, it's sustained community effort. So campus engagement is hugely important. It makes or breaks everything. It's not enough to make a pretty collection. It really should be collaborative. And when social justice lit guides are collaborative, they grow in power. And I kind of think of these as social justice guides because we're basically engaging in a kind of representational justice and at the same time a kind of knowledge justice because the absence of voices like this from the academy sends a certain message about which stories and forms of knowledge we value. And so by creating collections like this, we're challenging that kind of privileging of some knowledge over other kinds of knowledge. So I built all of the collections, or most of the collections, in collaboration with colleagues, with students, and with faculty. And here are just a few examples. So I knew I wanted to make a Heritage Month collection for Native American Heritage Month. And I discovered through just kind of poking around on the college website that there was a Indigenous Studies faculty working group at Trinity. So I emailed the working group and said, I'm going to be assembling this collection. Here are other kinds of collections we made like this. Would you like to work together? And they immediately said yes. And so together we decided what types of materials to include, how to organize them, what content to include. I had also been doing this separate initiative to reach out to student groups and just build relationships with students that are relationships that are reciprocal. And I had just met with a student group, and then they emailed me the next day, the Trinity College African Student Association, TASA, to say, I don't know if you've heard about this incident on campus where some unknown student taped a banana to the door of a Black student on campus. And so they asked if we could build a mini collection that centered Black resistance and empowerment poetry that they could then push out on their social media and ours as well. And that gave birth to this mini collection, Black Resistance and Empowerment Poetry mini collection. And they selected a lot of what's in that collection. And then at the same time, the Trinity College Black Women's Organization, I had just met with them, and they messaged to ask, could we build a mini collection that surfaced all of the writing that we had, or as much of the writing that we had, by Black women writers. And that resulted in the Read Black Women and Non-Binary Writers collection. And I asked for a tiny budget so that they could select, I think it was something like 20 books to add to the collection. And they ended up adding books written primarily by Afro-Latinas, as that's what they saw is the major gap in our collections and in general, what people were talking about and learning about. So the many eyes approach to these collections actually helped to fill in the blind spots that I had. And then each collection always had a built-in suggestion form so that when it was pushed out to the campus community, folks could then interact with it and also say what they would like to see added to it. And people that in fact use those forms. The fourth, let's say, good or best practice is increase the relevance, visibility, and usage of EDI-centered collections by integrating them into the curriculum. So I shared with, there was an American Studies professor that I often worked with, and I shared with her the Read Black Women and Non-Binary Writers collection. And as it turns out, the following semester, she was teaching a class on Black women writers and ended up requiring students to use this collection, and she added it to her Moodle course shell. And then by doing that, when I did instruction for the class, it gave me an opportunity to introduce this collection and some of the other collections that we had. The same thing happened with our Afrofuturism collection. I discovered by just combing the catalog to see what courses were being offered during the winter session, and discovered that a faculty member in urban studies was teaching a sound futurism course. So I emailed him the Afrofuturism collection, and he loved it and ended up using it for his class. But the really interesting thing that also happened was he set up a meeting and asked, could we also make a Latinx futurism collection? And at the same time, an English faculty member asked if we could make an Indigenous futurisms collection. And so I took both requests and ended up making the distinctive futurism collection that included Afrofuturism, African futurism, Latinx futurism, indigenous futurisms, queer futurisms, Muslim futurisms, AAPI futurisms, and it now has its own separate space in the library. And I just heard that students were excited about the area, so they invited the student art group to come in and paint murals where the collection lives, which really, I think, helps to contribute to that feeling that the library belongs to them and that they see themselves represented in it. Faculty teaching intro-level English classes, American Studies classes, and history classes were also using these new mini collections. So it wasn't just these like niche specialty liberal artsy kinds of classes. The thing that I wasn't expecting to happen that did, which was really awesome, I'll pull these up at the same time, is that through these collections and the partnerships built around them, it opened up the door for the integration of critical pedagogy into library instruction. I started getting requests from faculty teaching all kinds of classes to talk to students briefly about citational politics and then spend time teaching them strategies for building inclusive bibliographies. And then I had a first year seminar where they were doing stuff with learning about archives and was invited in to talk about how they could use these collections to kind of negotiate and work around archival silences. And then the last example in terms of integration into the curriculum is I had an instructor that I worked with pretty frequently, and he saw the Afrofuturism collection and sent me an email saying, hey, I want to talk about the Tulsa race massacre in my Trials of the Century class. Can you make a mini collection for it that's kind of a mix of a mini collection and a course guide? And so I worked with my colleague at the time, Jeff Liska, who's the Arts and Humanities librarian at Trinity, and we made this 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre collection, mini collection. And I ended up deciding to send it out through all the channels I usually do to the entire campus community around the anniversary of Tulsa, because thanks to shows like Lovecraft Country and Watchmen, everyone was talking about Tulsa. So I sent it out to the campus community, and this was in September 2021. And it became by far our most popular mini collection with 4,530 views, which is, some of that is probably outside of the institution, but it's pretty remarkable. The Afrofuturism collection, I believe, is at almost 1,300 hits. The fifth best practice is to integrate them into campus events. So because I designed them around a point of need and made them collaborative projects to start, this part happened organically. I didn't have to do anything. The Indigenous Studies faculty, after we created this collection together, organized an event entirely around the mini collection to share it with the rest of the campus. And I was invited to be part of the panel of presenters to talk about the collection, but also to situate it in broader conversations about the role of the library in creating a sense of belonging for students and engaging in this kind of broader DEI work. And I also used it as an opportunity to bring a pop-up library of the materials in this collection to the event so that folks can interact with those collections. The Trinity College Black Women's Organization held a pop-up library event for the Read Black Women and Non-Binary Writers collection that we had created together. And they held the event in the student-run underground coffee shop. And folks could grab a drink on the Trinity College Black Women's Organization, and then they could check out a book from the collection on the spot. So I brought optimistically 30 books because we only had an hour, and 23 of the books went out and were not returned immediately. They stayed out of the library for quite some time. And then we did the same thing with a Banned and Challenged Books collection that we created and held an event around. So making the collections collaborative practically meant that we had lots of folks on campus equally invested in cross-promoting these materials. And then there's the library catalog. So the cataloging librarian, who's amazing, worked to make the books in our distinctive futurism collection more easily discoverable in the catalog by recataloging, I think it was 211 books in Alma as distinctive futurism level A, since it had its own place in the library, and then applying new spine labels to each book that read future. And then if you searched the word Afrofuturism or anything related to it in the catalog, that would automatically pull up the mini collection in the catalog search results. And then, of course, he also added the materials from the collection to a new Primo VE collection discovery page. And I just wrote a short blurb to kind of describe the collection. And we also ended up doing the same thing for the leisure reading collections. And then just very quickly, in addition to all of those strategies, we did the kind of standard things that you should do to promote a collection. So you can see an example playing right now, pushing it out on our social media, but not just the library social media. I would also DM student groups that I thought this would be relevant to, and they would end up pushing it out on their social media. And I would DM the person who controlled the college social media, and they would do the same. And then we would share out things they were sharing. So it was a reciprocal kind of relationship. Digital signage, putting it on the library homepage, the college website, creating corresponding displays, creating a separate physical space for some of the collections if it made sense, printed materials like flyers and bookmarks, which you can then bring to student orientations when you table, targeted emails to student groups and faculty, newsletters, blogs, and then the student activities office always put out a weekly email to students. So I started asking, could they send out the mini collections in those emails, which they did. So since joining CT State Manchester campus this past April, I've made 4 mini collections. So the Juneteenth and the Pride collection were created in June, and I wasn't able to do them collaboratively because I didn't know anyone yet. But as it turns out, those collections ended up being outreach tools. As soon as I pushed them out to the campus community, I received requests back asking to collaborate to make similar kinds of collections. So that's where the Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month collection came from. The Student Government Association actually reached out to ask if we could build this collection together. So we met, we decided on the name of the guide, the types of materials to add, how to categorize the books, what content to include. And then my wonderful colleague, Maritza Morales, who's amazing, provided a Spanish translation of the guide's introduction. And then the students organized several events and asked me to bring parts of the collection to those events as a pop-up library and to present about the collection at one of the events. The other request came from a professor of English and philosophy, Garrett Dell, who was organizing events for Native American Heritage Month and asked if we could make a mini collection for that. And together we ended up inviting all the faculty from the campus to participate, many of which did. And that's how that collection was born. It includes land acknowledgement, but also steps that groups on campus could take in support of local Indigenous communities. But perhaps the thing I want to really say about this is the biggest lesson I learned in creating these particular collections is that I unintentionally engaged in 4 reverse diversity audits because of how I approached building these collections. I selected an area of focus that I wanted to create a collection for. I created a list of categories like poetry, memoir, Spanish language that I wanted to fill with materials. And then I had certain expectations about titles I wanted to go under those categories. So then I would search for those collections or categories in our catalog. And based on what we had and what we didn't have, that told me where I might concentrate future collection development work. This is my last slide. So one of the challenges is in this type of work, it's a super time consuming, but I think more than worth it for our students to see themselves represented in our collections, and to know that their lives and stories are valued. That contributes to a sense of belonging, which is a key ingredient to student success. So my workarounds for time consuming is to make the collections collaborative, especially when working with colleagues. That really allows us to share the work. But also I would say as a bonus best practice for dealing with the time consuming part is work in phases. Maybe you start by building a small part of a collection and share it out, and then seek partners to continue building it and promoting it together. The point is, it doesn't have to all happen at once. And then funding may be a potential hurdle if budgets are tight. And I say if, kind of laughing to myself, and I'm sure you all know why, but my workarounds are to start by surfacing and building collections around the materials you currently have in your collection, as long as those materials aren't outdated or containing offensive language and things like that, and to feature materials from the consortium, since folks have access to all of those materials, and it's a good way to fill in your gaps. And then finally, and Patrick can talk more about this when we get to the Q&A in a moment, is take advantage of the new EDI focused ebook collections, which I think are available today for the CSU system. But by incorporating those materials into the collection, it's a way to deal with the funding issue. But at the same time, it then becomes a way for us to make those new resources discoverable by folks in the campus community. So I'm going to end with this slide here. So I shared a bunch of recommendations for best practices for using LibGuides to increase awareness and engagement with EDI-centered collections. And so at this link, you'll find a Google Doc that I created that allows us to share out additional strategies that have worked either in whole or in part for doing that kind of work. And I think we can do this synchronously, asynchronously, but I imagine this document functioning kind of like a clearinghouse or repository for folks to use. It probably works best to populate it asynchronously. But I'm going to open it up now to questions and then and discussion. And I think as we're doing that, if things come to mind that can be added to that document now, please feel free to do that. And I think, Patrick, if you want to stop the recording.